I know it's been a while since I've posted something, but I just want to thank you for coming back, and I hope to get some more videos out soon. I recently surpassed the 1,000 subscriber mark, which is super exciting, and I'm so glad to see that so many people are getting into Mordheim for the first time, and that a lot of these videos have kind of inspired people to start playing. Just want to thank you all again for sticking around and subscribing, and I thought I'd use this video to sort of do an informal look at the game and go over some more obscure rules that you might find in this rulebook. The Mordheim rulebook is, as I've said, not the most clear piece of rules documentation in the world, and there are lots of things that players can get hung up on, and I thought I would take this video to kind of flip through and find some things that I'm usually finding players are having a hard time remembering, or some rules that are just a bit more obscure that you can use either to your advantage or to perhaps correct how you're playing the game. So stick around to maybe learn something about the game that you might not have known, or just to enjoy another conversation about one of my favorite tabletop games. Also, this video, you're getting a bit of a sneak peek at my latest warband, which I hope to talk about in the future. Not only just talk about the warband itself, but about another concept in model collecting and warband building. So let's jump into some of those obscure rules and learn how we can be better Mordheim players. So first I want to talk about some shooting rules. Now the rulebook states that when you are targeting which enemy you want to shoot, you must shoot at the closest enemy model, as it represents the greatest threat to your warrior. However, something that players sometimes can miss is that you're allowed to shoot at a warrior that's actually farther away than another if the other one is easier to hit. So for example, if this guy wants to shoot at one of these models, he could choose to shoot at this one, but it's in cover, so he'll get a -1 to his ballistic skill. But if he shoots at this more distant target, he actually doesn't get a penalty to his ballistic skill for cover. So he's allowed to shoot at this model, even though technically it's farther away than this one. Another exception to this rule is if your shooter is on a raised platform. So since my rifleman is at least 2 inches above the ground, he's allowed to pick which target he wants to shoot at. So he doesn't have to shoot at this closest model, he can actually shoot beyond him to a farther model. Another benefit to having the high ground and picking your target is you could pick targets that are technically in cover behind other enemies. Because in this game, if you shoot at an enemy and you miss your target number by 1, you technically hit the cover in front of them, if they had any. So if this warrior has a ballistic skill 4, and in a situation where there are no negative modifiers, then he hits this model on a 3, and he hits this model on a 4, because he's hiding behind this model. But since he's raised, he doesn't have to shoot at the closest model. He can shoot at this one, because he'll either hit this one on a 4, or if he rolls a 3, he hits the cover he's hiding behind, which happens to be another model. So in this case, it might be better to aim at a farther model with a lower chance to hit, because if you hit the cover, then you score a hit anyway. So we know in the game that there's a rule called all alone in the leadership and psychology section. So the all alone test states that when your warrior is fighting 2 or more enemies and they're outnumbered, and there are no friendly models within 6 inches, then that model is subject to an all alone test. At the end of their combat, they must test their leadership, and if they fail, at the end of that combat, they will flee 2d6 inches directly away from their combat, and each enemy that was in contact with them gets to make 1 automatic hit against the model. If they survive the hit, then they will move their 2d6 inches away, and at the start of each subsequent turn, the fleeing model has to test leadership again to see if they can recover. Otherwise, they keep fleeing 2d6 inches on their turn away from the fight and towards the nearest table edge. Plus, on any subsequent combats for the opponent, if they charge the fleeing model, then the fleeing model automatically moves another 2d6 inches away before any blows can be struck. And if that model moves off the table, it counts as being out of action. Keep in mind that if you have a friendly warrior within 6 inches, then you don't need to make an all-alone test. However, if the only other models within 6 inches are knocked down or stunned, then that model does need to make an all-alone test, because these guys are obviously offering no help. Moving over to combat for a minute. On your turn, if you want to declare charges, you must declare all of your charges before you move any other models. The rules for this were a bit unclear in the rulebook, and it actually took some debate and a lot of asking around on my part to figure this one out completely. But it makes sense in the end when you think about it. Because you're declaring all of your charges before you make them, it doesn't give you a chance to move and measure with one guy and then use that distance to judge whether or not you should charge with any other models. So if I want to charge with this Verminkin, I don't get to measure and move him and then declare a charge with this guy, because I will have gained information about how far away I am. So instead, at the start, I must declare I'm going to charge this dwarf with that Verminkin and use this Verminkin to charge this dwarf. And then you measure and make all your charges separately. Let's talk for a second about intercepts. So if you are charging an enemy, like let's say this Skaven in the armor is charging this dwarf back here, any model that is within 2 inches of the charge path can declare that they are intercepting that model. I've always interpreted this as, because the intercepting model is close enough to intercept, you then move that model into base contact along the shortest route to stop the other model. The rules aren't super clear as to how to manage this, but that has always seemed to work for us. You could also rule that because the player declared the intercept, then the warrior charges him instead. But I think it's very fitting and thematic that if you declare an intercept with a model, that model moves as far as they can along the path until they get perpendicular with the intercepting model, who then moves to stop them. Or I suppose you could position it like this, if that makes more sense in your mind. It doesn't change the outcome of combats a whole lot, as the number of attacks and the strength of your attacks is often more important than your actual positioning, but it is something that you should work out with your group and come to a conclusion on how to handle them. Another thing that has come up in debate before is where you can actually intercept from. For example, if this model wants to charge this dwarf in the back, obviously this dwarf can intercept this Skaven. But if I want to charge this dwarf, some have argued that this dwarf is able to intercept because they're 2 inches away from the path. However, there's a diagram in the part of the book that talks about this that depicts the charge path as a rectangle that ends where it touches the intended target and does not extend beyond them. So this dwarf is not actually able to make it up to intercept this. Another rule that's a bit obscure and kind of counterintuitive, it would seem, is charging fear-causing models. So this ghoul causes fear, meaning you have to pass a leadership test to charge it. If you fail the charge, you don't move, as you cower and do nothing on that turn. However, what if the model is knocked down or even stunned? Do they still cause fear? Well, yes they do. Even if they are completely incapacitated on the ground, you still must pass your leadership test to charge them. I guess a ghoul that's on the brink of death and writhing around on the ground is still a pretty fearsome sight. I wouldn't want to touch it. Let's talk about charging and climbing. You're allowed to make a climb as part of a charge. For example, here, if this Skaven declares a charge on this blunderbuss and successfully passes his initiative test to climb, and he has to charge in the shortest route possible, where can he go? There's nowhere for him to stand. I believe this question was answered in one of the FAQs. It states that if the charging model has no room to stand after making their climbing charge, then the target of the charge should scoot back to give them space to stand so they can fight at the top. While it might not seem fair to have to relinquish your position to a charging enemy, I believe this was put in the game to make high ground a little less advantageous. Otherwise, you might have situations where it's literally impossible to reach some models that are at high ground. Also, let's not forget one of my favorite rules in the game. If this Skaven stuns or knocked down this dwarf with the blunderbuss, then that dwarf has to make an initiative test because they're within 1 inch of a ledge. So since they're within 1 inch of a ledge, they have to pass their initiative test to stay on that ledge after they've been knocked down. Otherwise, they fall all the way off the ledge and could potentially injure themselves at the bottom. And when you fall, you take D3 hits at a strength equal to the distance you fell. So if this model fell 2 inches he would take 2 strength 2 hits. Also note that models that are stunned can only be automatically taken out of action by melee attacks. So if this Skaven were to hit this stunned guy with his sling, he would still have to roll to see what kind of injury he has, whether he's knocked down, stunned, or taken out of action. If he does knock him down and he's already stunned, he doesn't roll over to become knocked down. He stays stunned. This is not how it works in melee. If you melee attack a stunned model, they are automatically taken out of action. Only shooting and melee attacks can deal critical hits. Magic cannot deal critical hits, and taking damage from things like falling also cannot deal critical hits. It's only direct melee and shooting attacks that can deal crits. Another thing about crits is that even if your warrior has more than one attack in combat, you can only deal 1 critical hit per round. So if this ghoul attacks this dwarf here and rolls and lands 2 hits against him, and then rolls 2 6s, then only one of those 6s counts as a crit against this. The other just counts as a normal wound. I think this is meant as a balancing feature, because some warriors can get 5, even 6 attacks if they're lucky enough, and I think being able to crit more than once would just be a bit overpowered. However, the rules do not say anything about whether or not ranged weapons can crit more than once, so we can assume they can. Also, when a warrior attacks a model that is stunned, that warrior is automatically taken out of action. They don't get any kind of armor save or anything like that. However, if a model is just knocked down, you automatically hit that model, but you still have to roll to wound them, and they get their armor saves. Warriors can be equipped with up to 2 melee weapons and 2 separate ranged weapons. However, once you've entered combat with somebody, you cannot choose to switch weapons in the middle of combat. So, if this dwarf has a mace, an axe, and say a double-handed weapon on their back or something, if they decide to enter this fight and start the first round with their mace and axe in hand, they can't then switch to their double-handed weapon until either this model is killed or they exit combat in some way to then start a new round against a different opponent. Also, and I don't think this is specified in the rules, but it's how my friends and I play the game. Friendly models are not allowed to walk through each other. Meaning, if you have models here and you don't wish to move them, this guy can't actually walk through this gap. They would have to climb up here or maybe jump through these windows to come around. This is important to know because models, when declaring charges, must take the most direct path to their target. So if this dwarf back here wants to charge this ghoul, then they would have to charge in the most direct path, which in reality would be through these people. But since he can't go through them, then he would have to charge through this window, out this window, and hit the ghoul in this direction. Dwarves got short legs, so they can only move 3 inches, so you'd have to measure out whether or not his 6-inch charge is enough to get into combat. Here's another note on charging. As I said earlier in the video, you must declare all of your charges before measuring and moving all of them. I can't say declare this guy and then measure to see if he makes it in, and then declare the next one and measure for him, because you're learning information about the first charge that might affect your want to make a second charge. This is also important because, as I said in the last point, models must take the closest route to their target. So I'm not allowed to say charge this ghoul, but decide to put my model over here, and then charge this guy and put him over here, and leave room for this guy in the middle. Why might this be important? Well, if you have too many models charging one target, say I have these 4 models, and they only have a 6-inch charge range, let's say that is just 6 inches for all these models to make it to this ghoul. So he can make it in first, he makes it in second, let's say this guy just makes it in third. Now, let's say if this man can only charge 6 inches, 6 inches might now be too far for him to make it around into the open spot on the other side of the ghoul. So what could look like a sure thing from the start could change as you move your warriors. This would instead be a failed charge, and it would only go halfway to the target. This is especially important if you're charging with larger models, say like this Chaos Centaur. If my Centaur charges first along the shortest route with his 12-inch charge, and then my Chaos Dwarves charge with their 6-inch charge, maybe because the centaur is blocking, they don't have enough room to actually make it to the ghoul with their 6-inch charge. So sometimes it's useful to think about who you're charging with first. For example, if I have 12 inches to move with this guy, but only 6 with these two, I might feel it's important to charge in with these first, and then later send this guy with his ample movement to any open space on the other side of the ghoul. Alright, well, that's basically all I have to go over right now. I've been filming this video over 2 days while there's been some hectic stuff going on at home. But I hope you didn't find this video too scatterbrained. I know I was sort of all over the place. I'm going at this without a script for this one because I just wanted to put something up to show everyone that I haven't disappeared. I know it's been a few weeks since I posted something, but I hope to have some really cool content out here in the future. Like I said, I've got a new warband painted up, some of which you're seeing here on the top row, and I hope to show them off and go over another concept. And I also have another narrative campaign that I'm working on that I'll be testing soon, and I hope to get a draft out for the people to play, and I'll be sure to talk about that as well. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more, and play more Mordheim, and I hope you have fun.